Health checks were something that you have criticized, but lately the tide has turned a little bit. No, you haven't become any less critical, but you have shifted your focus on psychiatry. And this is why at least I'm here today, to learn a title that can be considered very provocative, but remember, however you feel about something, you have to remember that it's a reflection of your own beliefs. So for some of us, the title over there is very provocative. For others, that is just something that is written based on evidence. With this, thank you, Peter. It is an honor to ask you to present your 75-minute lecture, hopefully, on psychiatry drugs.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Teppo, for organizing this. Teppo is a magnificent organizer. I have known that for a couple of years now. The reason I worked in the drug industry was I didn't know what to do. I was a biologist and I studied insects near Varkaus in Finland. And I didn't know what to do, so my grandfather told me, why don't you go into the drug industry? He was a family doctor, and I did. And I quickly realized I need to get out of here. And I took the worst way out. I studied medicine, so I have two educations, as a biologist and a doctor. So sometimes I have nightmares about taking a third education. So I'm glad when I wake up and no more exams. Okay, so that's my little story. And let's go on. Now, it has become more and more easy to get a depression diagnosis. And we don't have more people with severe depression, but we have more people that get a diagnosis of depression because it's very easy to get it nowadays. And in America, they say that 10% are depressed at any given time, according to these criteria they use over there. Now Trump has been elected, it's probably worse. And you were depressed if you had little interest or pleasure in doing things for more than 7 days out of 14, plus just one additional symptom, which could be many things. Now, I've had a Finnish girlfriend, actually. That's why I was in Varkaus. And when she left me, I wasn't too happy. So what happens when you get discarded? Well, maybe you feel bad for all 14 days. Maybe you can't sleep too well. Then you are depressed. Or you don't eat too much, then you are depressed. Or you eat too much, then you are American. And then you run around more than you usually do. Well, you might have gotten a big grant or something, or being invited to the Daily Show in New York, as I once was. I was very happy about that. I loved Jon Stewart, but I never saw him. I was just part of their show, but anyhow. So then you can get a diagnosis of depression, and then you usually get a pill. And one of the things that has been criticized a lot is when you lose a loved one who dies. How long can you be sad without getting a diagnosis of depression? 1 year in 1980, 2 months, 2 weeks. Why not 2 days in the next edition of the diagnosis manual? Why not 2 hours? Why can't the psychiatrist get enough? They have enough patients already. They don't have enough time to talk to them. So they give them pills. Maybe they should have fewer patients and talk to them. Of course, this is not what happens in practice. If you're a family doctor, you don't have the DSM because it's hugely expensive. And if you had it, you wouldn't look up and say, oh, so you feel sad? Well, according to this Bible, it's only for 1 week. You will have to wait another week. and then you will have a pill. I mean, that's not how doctors are. They just get a pill, usually. Now, if we can't find anything wrong with you, so we are going to treat you for symptom deficit disorder. This is actually the situation right now. Studies have been made in general practice that half of the people they put on antidepressant pills don't have any legitimate indication for these pills. It can be everything. So that just makes the problem worse. Now, the FDA in America, the drug agency, was forced to do a huge analysis of 100,000 people participating in placebo-controlled trials of antidepressants. This was because of suicides in children. I'll come back to that. But they also looked at the benefits. 50% responded on drug, 40% on placebo. Well, the 40% in the placebo group is not a placebo effect. When I criticize antidepressant drugs, psychiatrists very often say, well, maybe they are not so effective, but then at least patients benefit from the placebo effect. The placebo effect is not what you see in a group that is depressed, and then after 4 weeks, you see the difference. That's not a placebo effect. If you want to study the placebo effect, you need to randomize to placebo and nothing. Then you can see what the placebo effect is. The placebo effect, we have been unable to detect it in antidepressant trials. So what we see in a placebo effect is the spontaneous healing of a depression. People get better if you don't do anything, okay? That's not an argument for using pills that people get better by nature. And this 10% difference is seriously biased because it is very subjective to decide if someone has improved. So you need to be absolutely certain that the trials are double-blind. They are not, because these drugs give people side effects. So in most cases, the doctor and the patients will have guessed who got active drug, who got placebo, and then we know the effect is being exaggerated by the psychiatrist. Now, I had a PhD student that looked into this. He collected 21 trials in all sorts of diseases. There were not more than 21, which had a blinded and an unblinded outcome assessor. So he wanted to see how much does an unblinded outcome assessor exaggerate the effect. And of course, most trials had used subjective outcomes, and he found the effect was exaggerated by 36% on average. That's a huge bias. What if the blinding had been broken for all patients in the depression trials? Then the 10% difference would, of course, be 0. But you only need to break the blinding in 5% of them if you then misclassify the outcome in all cases. So the 50% on drug becomes 45, the 40% on placebo becomes 45, no effect. So you don't need to break the blinding in very many patients before your result may be nothing. Now, this has been studied by putting something into the placebo that gives people similar side effects as antidepressant drugs. Then you can't guess whether you got active or placebo. That's ingenious. This has been done. There are 9 trials. They put atropine in the placebo, and then the drugs didn't work on depression. Only one on a scale that goes to 52, that's nothing, because 5 to 6 is the bare minimum that can be perceived as a change. So 1 is nothing. And the bare minimum that can be perceived as a change does not mean that the patients have improved, okay? If you can see light for the end of a tunnel, it doesn't mean that there is enough light to read a newspaper. You need more than that, okay? So this is very depressing. And these studies are very old because nowadays the drug industry will not collaborate with you if you say, I need to do better trials and put something in the placebo. Can you produce that for me? Oh no, that would be unethical, they would say immediately. You won't get there. But of course you can ask pharmacists to do this for you. So there is no excuse for not doing better trials. Now, even though the industry makes almost all of these trials, and they manipulate with the design and data analysis and all the rest, torture your data until they confess. And if they don't confess, you won't publish. Very easy, okay? So we can't trust drug industry trials in the world literature, but let's assume we can trust them. What do they tell us? Well, this is children. Standardized mean difference, that's a statistical term, don't worry about that. According to the psychiatrists, these drugs work for children. This is statistically significant, but 2 points on the Hamilton scale. That's not clinically relevant. What do the children say? These drugs don't work for us, okay? What do the adults say? The same, these drugs don't work for us. Who says they work? The psychiatrists. But the psychiatrists are not those you are going to treat. You're treating the patients, and they say they don't work. So why do the psychiatrists use drugs that their clients say don't work for them? It doesn't make any sense. Now, here is an American statistician who gets a lot of money from the drug industry. He got hold of data from trials of fluoxetine and venlafaxine, and then he could see day for day how it went for people with severe depression. 21 on Hamilton is severe depression, and the black squares are on drug, and the white ones on placebo. So it takes a long time. After a month, you are mildly depressed, so you have become considerably better on drug. How much longer does it take before you are also mildly depressed when you get nothing but a placebo? It takes 1 more week. And these trials are badly flawed. They are all industry trials. There's no atropine in the placebo. It's only the psychiatrist evaluation. If you have asked the patients, they would probably have had the same curves because they tell you they don't work. So what does this mean? Patients, not people, but have patience. I mean, be patient. You could tell your patients about all the horrible side effects of antidepressant drugs and then say, just wait a couple of more days and you will be fine without drugs. You will be equally fine without drugs. Can't you see how insane it is that here in Finland, you treat perhaps 300,000, 400,000 with antidepressant drugs for all sorts of things: depression, anxiety, divorce, failed an exam, I'm just anxious, whatever. It's crazy. And just one example, you can't trust the published literature. Pfizer has a drug called reboxetine. Only one trial was published, and that trial was positive. But there were 6 unpublished trials that didn't show anything, that Pfizer had buried deep in their archives. They had to provide them, because in Germany, they told Pfizer, we will not reimburse your drug unless we get all the trials from you. So Pfizer had to give them the negative trials. So that's the only reason we know that this drug doesn't work, just like the other ones. But I mean, this is so clear that you can't trust what is in the literature, which is what psychiatrists read. So maybe you can't blame them for being too positive towards that. Oh, well, you can blame them, but I won't do that too much tonight. Some of them are deeply corrupt, for example. And those are those who tend to do the drug trials are the worst ones, who are most corrupted. So, well, we can blame them, definitely. Now, if these drugs really were more beneficial than harmful, then people would stay on them. They don't. They drop out of the trials equally